One afternoon, a packed courtroom sat unusually still as a case that had already dragged on for weeks finally reached its final hearing. Both sides looked exhausted, but determined. At the plaintiff's table sat a woman in her 40s, her posture rigid, her expression locked in quiet frustration. Across from her sat a man in his early 50s, composed, almost detached, like someone confident the outcome would go his way. The judge took her seat and glanced over the file. The dispute centered around a business partnership, one that had clearly fallen apart. The woman claimed the man had withheld profits from a joint venture they built together. She alleged that over $80,000 had been diverted without her knowledge. When asked to speak, she didn't hesitate. "We built that business together," she said, "and then he cut me out." Her voice was controlled, but the weight behind it was obvious. The judge nodded, then turned to the defendant. "Your response?" The man leaned forward slightly. "She was never a partner," he said. "She helped. That's all." The statement landed immediately. The woman shook her head. "That's not true," she said. The judge raised a hand. "One at a time." She turned back to the man. "You're saying there was no formal partnership?" "Correct." "Any written agreement?" "No." The judge nodded slowly, then to the woman. "Do you have proof of partnership?" The woman hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Messages, transfers, work records," she said. The judge gestured. "Let's see them." The evidence appeared on the screen. Bank transfers labeled business, messages discussing operations, shared responsibilities, references to our clients, our profits. It looked convincing, but not definitive. The judge leaned back slightly. "This shows involvement," she said, "not necessarily ownership." The room settled into a quiet tension, because without a clear agreement, the case was starting to lean in one direction. The man remained calm. "She worked for me," he said. "I paid her when I could." The woman's expression tightened. "That's not what this was," she said. The judge watched both of them carefully, then asked, "Did either of you register a business entity together?" "No," the man said. "No," the woman echoed. The judge nodded. "So we're dealing with an informal arrangement." A pause. "That makes proof critical." The woman looked down briefly, then back up. "I have something else," she said. The man didn't react. The judge gestured. "Go ahead." The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Not a stack of papers, not printed messages, something different. She handed it to the clerk. The courtroom leaned in, not physically but in attention, because the tone had shifted. The judge opened it. Inside, a USB drive. The same kind of quiet object that doesn't look like much until it changes everything. The judge looked at it briefly. "What is this?" "Financial records," the woman said. "Internal ones." The man's posture changed, just slightly, but enough to be noticed. The judge caught it. "Play it," she said. The screen flickered. A spreadsheet appeared, detailed, precise, income logs, client payments, profit distributions. The judge leaned forward. Because this wasn't general information, this was internal tracking, not something you get by accident. She scrolled, then stopped. Highlighted rows, 2 columns, one labeled reported, the other actual. The difference between them was not small. It was significant. The room shifted. Then the judge opened another file, an audio recording. The woman's voice was faint in the background, the man's voice clear. "Just keep the official numbers clean," he said. "She doesn't need to see everything." The courtroom didn't react loudly. It didn't need to. The silence was louder than any noise. The judge paused the recording, then slowly turned toward the defendant. "Would you like to explain that?" For the first time, his composure cracked. Not dramatically, but enough. Because in that moment, the case didn't just change, it flipped. The man didn't answer right away. For the first time since the case began, he looked unprepared. Not because he didn't understand the question, but because there wasn't a version of the answer that could undo what had just been played. The judge waited. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't rush him, because now time was no longer working in his favor. "I don't know what that is," he said finally. The response came out weaker than anything he had said before. The judge didn't react immediately. She simply looked at him, long enough for the answer to settle and fail. "You don't know what it is," she repeated. He nodded. "No." The judge turned the screen slightly. "That is your voice," she said. He hesitated. "It sounds like me." The courtroom shifted, because now the distance between denial and admission was shrinking. The judge leaned forward. "And those are your records," she continued, tapping lightly on the screen. "Detailed internal financial tracking, including discrepancies between reported and actual income." He didn't respond, because silence had become safer than explanation. The judge turned to the woman. "How did you obtain this?" The woman didn't hesitate. "I had access," she said. "I handled the accounts for months." The judge nodded slowly. "That aligns with what I'm seeing." She looked back at the man. "You said she was just helping." He didn't answer. "Helpers don't usually maintain internal financial logs," the judge added. Another silence. The courtroom felt different now, not tense, resolved. The direction was clear. The judge continued. "You maintain two sets of records," she said. "One official, one actual." She paused. "And you excluded her from the full financial picture." The man's jaw tightened. "I was managing the business," he said. The judge tilted her head slightly. "Managing or controlling?" He didn't respond, because that distinction had already been made clear by the evidence. The judge leaned back again. "Let's go back to your original statement," she said. "You said she was never a partner." "Yes." The judge gestured toward the screen. "These records suggest otherwise," she continued. "She had access, she tracked revenue, she was involved in operations, and based on this recording, you actively concealed financial information from her." Each point landed cleanly. The man's earlier confidence was gone completely now. "What do you have to say about the difference between reported and actual income?" the judge asked. He hesitated. "It was internal accounting," he said. The judge didn't blink. "Internal accounting that hides money from someone you claim had no stake in the business." He said nothing, because there wasn't a way to align that explanation with what was visible. The judge turned slightly, bringing everything into focus. "This is no longer a question of whether she was involved," she said. A pause. "It's a question of how much you withheld." The room stayed silent, because the case had crossed a line. It wasn't just a dispute anymore. It was exposure. The judge looked directly at him. "You didn't just exclude her," she said. "You structured the records to do it." The man lowered his gaze, and that was as close to an admission as the courtroom was going to get. The judge turned back to the woman. "Do you have calculations of what you believe you're owed?" "Yes," she said, handing over another document. The judge reviewed it carefully. Numbers aligned, dates matched, cross-referenced with the hidden records. Then she placed it down and looked up. The silence before the decision wasn't suspenseful anymore. It was inevitable, because once the hidden evidence came out, there was no version of the story left that could hold against it. The judge didn't take long. She didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already on the record. She looked down at the documents one final time, then back up at both of them. "This case is no longer based on conflicting claims," she said. Her voice was calm, certain. "It is based on documented evidence." The man stood still, his earlier composure completely gone now. The woman remained steady, but her grip on the table had tightened slightly. The judge continued. "You maintain two sets of financial records," she said, "one that reflected actual income and one that did not." She paused briefly. "And you made a conscious effort to prevent the plaintiff from seeing the full picture." The man didn't respond. He couldn't, because the evidence had already answered for him. The judge turned slightly toward the woman. "You were not just assisting," she said. "You were actively involved in the operation of this business." The woman nodded once, quietly. The judge leaned forward. "That establishes a de facto partnership." The words landed with weight, because that was the turning point, not just involvement, ownership. She continued, "And based on the records provided, you were entitled to a share of the profits." The man's jaw tightened slightly, but he said nothing. The judge picked up the calculation sheet again. "These figures align with the undisclosed income shown in the internal records." She placed it back down. "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff." The words settled firmly. No hesitation, no ambiguity. "You are ordered to pay the amount of $80,000, she said. The number landed heavily in the room. The woman exhaled, quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. The man closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, because now there was nothing left to argue. The judge wasn't finished. "I will also note," she added, "that the conduct reflected in these records raises serious concerns beyond this courtroom." Her tone didn't change, but the implication did. The man looked up, for the first time, not defensive, not confident, just aware. The judge held his gaze for a moment longer. "When you hide the truth," she said, "you don't eliminate it." A pause. "You delay the moment it comes out." The courtroom stayed silent, because that was exactly what had happened. She gathered her papers. "This case is concluded." The gavel came down, firm, final. The woman remained standing for a second longer, her expression steady, but now with something different behind it, closure. The man stepped back slowly from the table. No sudden movement, no reaction, just the weight of a situation that had completely turned against him, because what began as a controlled narrative ended the moment the hidden evidence was revealed, and the truth no longer needed anyone to explain it. The room began to move again, but neither of them did. For a few seconds, they both stood where they were, on opposite sides of the same table, but no longer arguing, no longer defending, just standing in what had just happened. The woman was the first to move. Slowly, she gathered her papers, but this time her hands weren't tight with tension. They were steady. The man didn't reach for anything right away. He remained still, staring briefly at the screen that had gone dark, as if expecting it to turn back on, as if hoping it hadn't been as clear as it was, but it had. The clerk called for the next case. Voices shifted, chairs moved, the courtroom reset. The moment was over, at least for everyone else. They both stepped out into the hallway. This time, the distance between them felt different. Not hostile, not tense, just defined. She stopped a few steps ahead, then turned back toward him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said, "You really thought I wouldn't find out?" It wasn't a question. It didn't need to be. He exhaled slowly. "I thought I had time," he said. That answer landed, because it wasn't denial. It was admission, just framed differently. "You didn't think I deserved to know," she said. He didn't respond because that part was already clear. "I was building that with you," she continued, "not working for you." He looked at her now. For the first time since the ruling, he held her gaze. "I know," he said. The words were quiet, late, but real. She nodded slightly. "You knew then too," she replied. Another pause. People passed around them, but neither moved. "You just didn't want to deal with it," she added. He looked down briefly, then back up. "No," he said, "I didn't." The honesty changed the tone again, not softer, but clearer. She adjusted the folder in her hands. 80,000, she said. He nodded. "I'll pay it." There was no resistance in his voice. No argument left, because the case hadn't just been lost, it had been exposed. She studied him for a second. "Make sure you do," she said. "I will." A pause. Then she turned to leave, but before she did, she stopped. Next time, she said without looking back, don't build something with someone if you're planning to hide it from them. He didn't answer immediately, then quietly, there won't be a next time. She didn't respond. She walked away, steady, certain, not rushed, because she wasn't chasing anything anymore. She had what she came for. He stayed there for a moment longer, then leaned back against the wall, not out of exhaustion, but reflection, because the case hadn't turned on argument or persuasion or strategy. It turned the moment the truth, hidden, recorded, undeniable, was finally revealed. And once it was, everything else fell exactly where it was supposed to.